this week we're going to dig into something different topic altogether, and we're kind of shifting a bit into looking at things like development. So if you think of new product development, product management, product road mapping, that sort of stuff, that's the direction we're heading into this week. And we'll start by talking about innovation. As kind of a preface to this, you may remember in the first week or two of school that I talked about Peter Drucker. And do you remember what Peter Drucker's comments were that I fully embrace about the true purpose of business? Anybody remember what Peter Drucker said? What is the true purpose of business? Go ahead and type it into the chat box if you remember, or type in an answer even if you don't. Just like to cycle us back to kind of frame up the discussion today. No takers, huh? Well, classically, most people would answer profit or money, but really, in order to, looks like we do have a couple people coming in. That's good. Add value, keep the customer. Okay, good. Customer. Thank you, Lamisa. Exactly. Ekaterina and Monica, you're sort of drilling down to what Lamisa said with the customer. And, without a customer, there's no way you can generate a profit. So it's pretty straightforward. You got to create the customer and really precisely create the opportunity with the customer. And then, of course, there has to be the value exchange in order for the customer to complete the transaction. And then, of course, everything else has to flow in order to generate the profit. So, but what, let's build on this a little bit. What did Drucker say were the two primary functions of business? Anybody remember that? Again, I think I referred to this in week 1 or week 2. Okay, what did Drucker say were the two primary purposes of business? Does anybody remember that? Let me type this in just in case. I should say two primary functions of business. Sorry, kind of mix it up. Okay, marketing, very good, Sophie. So that's one of them. What's the second one? Innovation, right. It's sitting there right in front of us, right on the agenda. But yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what we're looking at is, these are the, and if you think about it, and customer satisfaction, delivery, reliability, absolutely think are critical, Bryn. Don't get me wrong at all. I think, and that fits under that marketing sphere, right? And really what you're trying to do is, and this is really, I think, Drucker's primary message, is trying to differentiate yourself. It's a lot of barriers, despite all the tension that might exist in the world today. We have a lot of trade. And so I know in the industry that I was involved in mid-late 90s, suddenly we saw competitors popping up from literally all over the globe. Previously we'd had them mostly in North America, Europe, and Asia. And then suddenly places, some in the border regions of those areas and some just out of blue, were starting to pop in. And we had over 100 competitors, and it was not really a mature market, but it was certainly maturing. But it was constantly a challenge to keep up with, the constant change of competition, never mind the technology. And so, lots of things going on related to that. And so, yeah, exactly what you're talking about. So differentiation, that's the key thing. And, everything else is subservient to that. Operations and, the finance and information technology, logistics, all that sort of stuff should support a company's focus towards creating customers, generating profits, and then reinvesting in innovation and marketing, which, the innovation alone feeds most other functions in terms of development, et cetera. So we're going to look at innovation. We're going to look at product roadmaps today. and let's jump in. Innovation, just a quick definition. Basically, the introduction of something new, a new idea, method, or device. And that's the thing that I like to emphasize. It's not just product, right? It can be a new way of doing things, or a new way of looking at things, too. There's a lot of buzz and talk about diversity in the workplace these days, and there's also these tendencies to sort of isolate and try to separate nationalism, if you will. We see it in our country. It's pretty disturbing at the end of the day, because what you guys know, especially working in this multicultural or living in this multicultural and studying in this multicultural environment, is you understand the value of diversity. You understand why it's important that there's equality between genders, and why it's important to have different voices and different people from different religions, and why it's different people from different age groups and different ethnic categories and all that sort of stuff. It enriches our life by informing us. It also helps us to look at things in completely different ways. And I come from the school where the more diversity we have, the better quality the overall experience will be. And that includes decision making. And as long as you include people, if you try to exclude people, it ain't going to happen. So, this is something I think that is certainly interesting about IUM. We've mentioned this before, but it also feeds in this whole idea of innovation, which feeds in this idea of unity and diversity. Great way of putting it, Sophie, sorry. I want to add an A in there. So Schumpeter, one of the great thought leaders in this space, talked about really deconstruction, in other words, pulling things apart to kind of better analyze them. But he basically said that innovation changes the values onto which the system is based. In other words, it's very disruptive, and it really causes us to look at something in a new, fresh way. And when you say the word innovation, usually the connotation is in a positive way, not in a negative way, although there certainly could be negative innovations. So it can be seen as something that is a change in the thought process, again, ideas, and for doing something, so the process for doing something also something very tangible and very physical, or it can be the useful application of inventions or discoveries. I like to bring up an example like the drive-through window, if you go to Quick, or if you know McDonald's, or other places, the drive-through window is something that we think of iconically, certainly in the United States, as being associated with fast food. Okay? The reality is that drive-through windows existed, I think, in the banking industry as early as the 1920s, so maybe about 10 years or so after automobiles started to become fairly significant and prominent. And so it was in one industry and then got applied to another industry and really shook that up. Yeah. As a little bit of research that I did not too long ago, that is what I found. Now, we'll see whether the research is true or not, but yeah. And so adopting something from another application is also a form of innovation. Okay. Innovation also can refer to incremental, emergent, radical. So it can be a broad range. It doesn't have to be the radical or revolutionary side, right? It can be a small change that has high impact, okay, or even just any impact. And so again, want to broaden our definition a little bit to really get us thinking about it. So again, thinking, products, processes, or organizations, different structures. Think in your career, the average age in this class is probably around 30, 31, something like that, maybe early 30s. So you've got 10 years or so of work experience typically. Some is much, quite a bit more than that, others less. If the audience or customer is new, would it be considered an innovation? I think from a customer or audience point of view, it would be considered an innovation. The company may have been using it for a long time, but if you shift perspective, then it becomes something new, a new idea, a new process, a new way of thinking. Then I would consider it an innovation from a customer point of view. That's why you see drive-through windows. If you look at it as you're a builder, and you build drive-through windows for banks, and you build drive-through windows for fast food places and pharmacies and all those things that we use them for in the U.S., then from a builder's point of view, no, it's nothing new, just a slightly different variation on the same theme. But for the person who wants to stay in their car, or it's convenient, or they have to stay in their car for the purposes of getting their prescription filled, then the first time that they use it certainly is an innovative idea. So let's look at a couple of examples. This example is a woman that I actually met a few years ago. Her name is Sally Foster, and she lives in Spartanburg, South Carolina, southeastern part of the U.S. And what Sally did is she identified a problem and an opportunity. Back around 1969 or 70, she had a couple of kids, and she was working for her husband's wholesale package office supply store wholesaler. So they had paper and they had other kinds of things that were sitting around in bulk, so big rolls. And they had Christmas paper. It was coming up on the fall, and they had ordered a bunch of wrapping paper, and in fact, he felt that they had ordered too much. So he had a problem. He had invested in too much inventory and had a problem. Sally, on the other hand, while she was working for his company, she also was involved in the parent-teacher organization at her children's grammar school. And the school was trying to raise funds through bake sales and other traditional means to attempt to generate some money that would support different programs at the school and ultimately supporting the children's education. So, dinner one night, her husband said he had this problem, too much wrapping paper, and Sally said she had, problem trying to figure out how to come up with a fundraiser that would raise significant money. Well, they put their heads together, and what Sally came up with was an innovative approach towards raising money for education. And it was really simple. She cut the paper into smaller squares, about 1/3 of a meter in length, and also decided that 50% of the revenue would go to the schools. And this was an era when fundraisers, typically something as much as 75 to 90% of the money made by the children would go to the company that provided the products and services. Very little of the money would go to the schools. And so the bump to 50% of the revenue to the schools. New idea, new approach, solved several problems. And it led to, by the way, a $100 million business. Became the number one fundraising approach for primary schools in the U.S. for a long time, and still around, still quite successful. Second thing is, Apple. Apple came up with the iPod. Now, it wasn't the first MP3 player out there. In fact, they were quite a few years, 3, 4, 5 years behind the market in terms of coming out with an MP3 player. But they developed the iTunes in roughly over the same 1 or 2 year period, and then developed, like Apple's done before, their own closed loop system. If you want the songs available from these artists to be able to stream online, then you can only access them through iTunes, and you can only download them into the iPod. And so they formed, in essence, their own economic system. It was self-supporting. You need the hardware in order to get the iTunes. The third example is the Nintendo Wii, new game console. We might have talked about the Nintendo before, but highly competitive market. They were losing share to the competition. Sony was competing. I guess Microsoft might have entered the market at that time. So, really, really cutthroat competition to go after, what seemed to be a market mostly oriented towards younger boys in particular. And what they did is they combined really the console with the concept that the family could enjoy things. And so they developed all their, programs, or many of their programs, to support family involvement and overcoming a barrier of perceived isolation of, the son in particular, but sometimes the daughter, or the daughter and the son, or even sometimes the mom or the dad for that matter, from the rest of the family unit as they played the games by themselves. So it was a very, very clever approach. This is a link. I'm not sure it's active anymore. It's a little bit dated, but you can do a web search on innovations and come across a number of different sources of information. So, entrepreneurs engage in innovation. Entrepreneurs are always looking at things in a different way. They may look at the same pool of customers, but come up with different approaches. Some very good examples these days are Uber, which, or Lyft in the U.S. Also, what else do we have? Airbnb, very, very disruptive models that emerged in the last 5 or 6 years. and are turning things upside down in terms of the opportunity. And it's because somebody looked at, pool of customers in a different way, or expanded the pool of customers and looked at how do you solve these problems in different ways. And technology is a big part of it, as is obviously the service behind it. So, improved quality, durability, service, price of goods and service they sell, all things that can satisfy consumer demand or sometimes shift expectations of the customer favorably, such that it creates your own competitive advantage. Technical innovation may be the most powerful. It's created by people interacting in the course of trying to promote the projects that interest them. So, an example, of course, is the internet and, us using this and how disruptive this has been in, I think, mostly a very positive way for higher education and for students globally. So clearly a big deal. Invention is the first occurrence of an idea, while innovation is the first attempt to carry it out in practice. And again, the caveat I like to put is that innovation, also is linked to different customers, different ways of thinking, different ideas, different processes. So it's not just limited to a specific product or tangible item. It can be other things as well. And so, innovation to me is much broader. And also there's a contextual element to innovation that also matters. So it's not the same as invention. It doesn't even require invention, because invention is specifically usually about a product, however, invention can certainly contribute to innovation, that's for sure. And then there's just different things you'll find as you explore the word innovation online about, different places that may be a little more friendly in terms of innovation, and sort of a usual suspect list, if you will. You find small countries, large countries, Asian, European, American primarily. You don't typically find African or Latin American countries, certainly not on the short list, although I would argue that is beginning to change as other leaders in other countries, both business leaders and government leaders, recognize the value of having a dynamic economy, one where innovations are constantly being applied, one where there is a certain measure of research and invention taking place. And, I would expect more and more coming out of, a lot of other places, certainly over the next generations, as they work to solve their own problems, pollution, overcrowding, water, etc. A number of different inputs into innovation: government and fiscal policy, education policy, the innovation environment. One quick comment about education that I've certainly noticed in different parts of the world that I've worked in and taught in is, the ability to think critically, to deal with vagueness and be able to sort things out and make decisions that end up, moving the enterprise or even just moving yourself in the right direction. I mean, there's just things that come along with the ability to think creatively and critically that feed into how we look at things and how we solve problems. And so, an education policy that encourages critical thinking and creativity, I believe, is a much stronger policy in the long run towards enabling a more innovative kind of economic environment. Outputs include things like patents, technology transfer, other R&D results, performance, of course, and business performance, and then also overall growth. And so, these are things that should not surprise us. Now let's shift a little bit towards, kind of a deliberate process of developing products, if you will. And you could apply this, I think, to the service industry as well. And it acknowledges the fact that there are things that are unfolding, technological things, inventions, innovations that are unfolding that you want to plan for and integrate as it makes sense based on, close feedback with the customer base and an eye on the competition too. So developing a product roadmap, of future products and services either derived from existing products or services or could be brand new. And it helps to create a common vision of the future. It's like strategy, right? You want to have that common vision. So a product example, roadmap example might be one of my favorite mints. I haven't had them in a long time, but I used to have them with me all the time, are Altoids. It's a mint that apparently has been around for over 100 years. In its earliest form, if you look on the left-hand side, mid-1990s, sort of reintroduced with this tin can packaging and priced a bit higher than normal and all that sort of stuff. And over time, you saw it evolve in several directions, from the sour mints in the circular can with the pastel colors on it to wintergreen to cinnamon. And then for the original plain mints, they had smaller sizes. They had the ones that you could stick on your tongue, the little thin sheet you could stick on your tongue. And then they had other forms of the same flavor of mints, if you will. From a cinnamon point of view, which evolved from the original basic kind, they ended up with really my favorites, the dark chocolate cinnamon, that really more candy than mint. And then what this product roadmap shows is the idea that you might combine, for example, something like a Ben & Jerry's along with Altoids. And so maybe you have a chocolate cinnamon Ben & Jerry's flavor, and that would be some kind of future vision in terms of what a product roadmap might look like that helps to drive your investments from a research and development point of view, helps you to plan your strategies in terms of your financial and your marketing and your operational strategies so that you're prepared for that future as it arises. This is what a product roadmap would be used for. A couple types of products. There's breakthrough products with a whole new set of performance features or standards, if you will, and then there's incremental. And these are improvements to an existing product range. Sometimes the lines get a little bit blurred depending on things that matter most to customers. There may be a certain size profile that you've got to fit, and so even if it's a breakthrough product, it still has to fit in the same physical space. And so things like that you've got to sort of respect in order to make sure that you're accommodating current demand and listening to the market. Product development process, there's sort of 4 phases. You'll see other books or other resources use multiple, number of different phases. So not necessarily locked into the number 4, but first you're thinking about the problem or the opportunity that you're trying to solve. You're developing an approach towards solving that problem. Then you're preparing, how you're going to do that, including introducing the product into the marketplace with whatever education and market awareness information you need to share. And then there's the implementation of the strategy. The key thing is to make sure that you think deeply enough and that you are inclusive enough in answering the right kind of questions, and this includes getting experts, but it also includes typically getting customers, prospects, channel partners, consultants to the industry. The more variety and the more people you can get involved, the better. The challenging part is you could go on forever gathering information and never accomplish anything. So there's a delicate balance between spending too much time and effort on trying to get as much information as possible and not spending enough. And so there's no hard, fast rule, but make sure that you do get sufficient breadth. Think through logically about the value chain. Think through your supply chain. Think of all the different types of customers that matter most to you. Think about potential customers. If you introduce a new kind of product or innovation or change to a product line, how does that open up, expand, or modify your customer base? Think of the influencers, like consulting engineers and governments and other folks that, may influence the outcomes for a particular industry segment. You want to think deeply about who you involve, and hopefully it leads to development of what we call a point of view. It's not reached by consensus. It's reached by gathering good information and then acting on that information and making the best decisions possible. You should have one person, often a product manager or the product line manager who sits over the product managers to present the point of view about what the product line should look like in the future. And once that point of view is agreed upon, it can't be changed unless there's some significant new evidence that indicates it should shift. And evidence would include major competitive changes, major technological breakthroughs, or major, information from the customer base that was very disruptive. An example might be if, a government in a country came out and said, no more fossil fuels. You cannot use gasoline or even natural gas with your automobiles. It must be all electrical. That would be huge, and you would have to change your product development if you wanted to compete in that marketplace. Okay, and then ultimately, what's the value proposition? So examples of breakthrough products might include, historically, electric lighting, antibiotics, jet engines, microwaves, credit cards, etc. So a lot of, and even processes and procedures like hospital procedures that eliminate invasive surgery and the need for long hospital stays. It used to be something like a hip or a knee replacement. You might stay in a hospital for 2 weeks. Today, you may stay for one night. So, there are different approaches that represent major breakthroughs in innovation as well. Different kinds of line extensions, horizontal and vertical. So, investigate or research the Toyota Prius. Take a look at the wide variety of models that they now have. I think in the U.S. they had maybe 5 different versions of the Prius, Toyota Prius, the electric vehicle, that they offer in the U.S. market. They probably have more globally because that seems to be something that I notice when I'm outside the country is that they often have way more products than what are available just in our local market in the U.S. And then on the other hand, you might take like the engine that is used in the Prius and apply it to other vehicles, okay? And so, you may have different kind of line extensions. So ones that appeal to different taste and ones that appeal for different need. Another way to look at it just sort of broadly is, for example, the Japanese car companies some years ago, I think it was Honda and Acura, are in the same, from the same company. And, Honda was producing cars for really the middle income, appealing to the mass middle, if you will, of the American market. And then the idea was that as people became more successful in their careers and as they accumulated things like family and other stuff, that they would have cars within the family of Honda vehicles that would support the changes that we go through in life. As people, some people got wealthier and could afford it, then they would shift into another brand altogether, such as the Acura. So it was appealing to different tastes, if you will, and a taste for a more luxurious vehicle, maybe with leather seats and more perks and benefits and that sort of stuff. So different kinds of things that are going on. Got somebody else jumping in, it looks like, trying to take over as presenter. Let's see. Okay. Somebody took over. Another way to do it is when you've got platform and you can modularize things. So platform common elements, and again, you see this in the car industry a lot. In fact, back 1981, I think it was, America's number 3 automobile company, Dodge Chrysler was failing, and they brought in a guy named Lee Iacocca. And one of the things Iacocca did is he eliminated a lot of the platform elements. They just had too many. It was very costly. And so he consolidated, and things like the frame, the undercarriage for the car that the engine and the seats and everything else sit on and that you bolt the wheels to, in effect, and the axle, etc., transmission, he standardized that. So they went from, a whole bunch to just a handful. And so they made it a more modular kind of concept where you could sort of plug in different elements that were standard. You see that with engines a fair amount. And, that helps from a cost point of view to, produce a lot more of one thing, cost and quality typically, that can be applied to different models. And those different models appeal to different customer segments. And so, how can you modularize things? Services can be modular. You can break things up. Think of a flow diagram or a process map. You've got different sequences of activities, and those activities can be applied to a wide variety of different things. For example, in a fast food restaurant, I've never worked in one, but there are probably people that are good at putting together the different types of sandwiches. They may even use the same kind of bun, for example, bread, and just put chicken instead of beef in it, as an example. And so, they are modularizing the service. And so if we look at a new product or service development process, we look at the idea generation, the deep thought that goes into that, recognizing the opportunity, and then the development phase, the testing to make sure that your ideas are sound, and then the commercialization stage, and finally it shifts over to the project management stage where you're launching the product and then doing everything you can to make sure that you have the maximum success possible. What you have to guard against are things like barriers, the phone, meaning it's easy for people to leave voice message, or these days to ignore an email or a text message. Distance, time, we can overcome some of these things with technology, but things are still out there that allow for people to hide, if you will. And partners also can be barriers, too much confidence, success, expert opinion. This is why I think it's best to stay close to the customers and the influencers in the customers, and also to work closely with your channel. Make sure that they're all involved and on board with your vision and ultimately what your point of view is. It should be more biased towards the external environment, providing good feedback into the point of view rather than the internal environment. And this is why things like not and here syndrome. Some years ago I was working for a Silicon Valley startup in high tech, and went to a potential customer, made a presentation, thought things were going well, went to use the restroom, was walking back, and I heard the lead engineer telling the team there's no way that they were going to adopt our innovation, that they could design something better. Well, the truth is that they couldn't design something better. You could see it in their existing product designs, and you knew that they did not really have the capability. What you had was an ego at the top of the design team that really believed in their capability. And on the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, if it prevents you from adopting new innovations and doing other things that sometimes are patented, then that can suppress development and ultimately hold the organization back, and it can long-term affect, sometimes even short-term, growth and profitability. You lose customers rather than create them. So there's also distrust. I experienced this also. I was on the marketing and sales side, product management, and R&D people don't necessarily trust marketing people. Some of you may have experienced that as well. Marketing people are paid to be somewhat optimistic and to usually have strong egos related to what they know about the marketplace. Engineers, on the other hand, also can have very strong egos about what they know about technology and what the right thing to do is to do technology. An example of this also from my Silicon Valley startup days is one of the three founders insisted that I was wrong about the marketplace. And not that it was the only reason, but it certainly was an indicator to me about 3 days after I signed on with them that he would be a really tough barrier to overcome internally. They were missing 70% of the market because of his attitude and the fact that the other two founders were afraid to take him on. And even though I brought him out to customers and he heard directly from customers what I knew to be the case from 15 years of experience in the industry, he just refused to listen to it. As a result, they ended up, instead of having a key competitive advantage in the marketplace, they ended up being about 18 months to 2 years behind the market, and never were able to grow the way they wanted to, and lost some of their critical early stage OEM relationships, partnerships, as a result of it. Now, that was not the only thing, but it sure was a strong thing that indicated they weren't going to be able to fulfill their real potential. So you got to watch out for those things. Example of something that missed the mark was the Apple Newton. Slide first, durability under innovation. How can a company laser tune durability and market need of new innovation? Lamisa, good question. Durability, to me, in this case, may mean that, and it kind of goes back to something I said a little bit earlier, where you've got to be really, really careful that when you introduce a new innovation, or even a new invention for that matter, that you don't backslide on some key factor somehow. So let's say people are used to you having a product that works extremely well, and you introduce a new product and it has some nice new features that the customer said they wanted, but it doesn't work quite as well. It's a less durable product. So you've got to be really, really careful that the product maintains those things that matter most to the customer, if that makes sense. So that's what I would think is, just be very aware that even when you're introducing something new, you are typically replacing something else, and that there's other factors. For example, if something new only lasts for 6 weeks and yet the other thing lasted for 20 years, now all of a sudden you got some major issues, and I've seen that happen as well. Again, from my high-tech background, introduced a new product, was smaller physically, which was good, similar price point, or actually a little bit less expensive, which was good, but better functionality, which was also good. The problem was that it was the first generation of the product, and we ended up having some problems, and so we spent an awful lot of money and time servicing it and trying to repair it, for the first few units that we shipped, before we realized what the problem was and could, institutionalize it. Now, the fallback was, for the customer, was to take our new unit out and put the old unit back in that had worked forever. And so, again, just a way to kind of think through, what are those things that really matter most? At some point, whatever led to that durability was an innovation or an invention itself, and now it's taken as a part of the overall package of features and benefits that a customer expects. So marketing identifies trends and opportunities, helps establish the opportunity, looking at sales, profit potential, unit volume, mix, value-added opportunity, those things that you do. Who best to help you get, create the customers? What kind of price points and margins are there? What sort of competition, both direct and indirect competition, do you have? And then ultimately developing the value proposition for the product and the service, as well as the positioning. So marketing's involvement, preliminary market assessment, formal study. Marketing's involved throughout. Choosing those customers that you might beta test or include in your pool of expertise. There's just a whole lot of things that you want to do strategically. I know when I managed product launches, I was involved in 11 significant product launches during my sales and marketing career. I mean, big ones, not just little ones. And I know that, when I got to be a marketing manager and then product line director, we would be very strategic about launching, trying to identify the right customers in specific marketplaces to make sure that when we introduced our products that we had every opportunity to be successful. We felt it was important for, really to get it right the first time. And when you're dealing with high-tech products, it's easy to get it wrong the first time, especially when you're talking about hardware and software. I'm the kind of person that believes that it's really the third generation. It might be getting better these days, but I still would prefer to wait 3 generations to buy a new product, because I know that there's a pretty good chance that some decisions are made to, rush the product to market, if you will, because of the competitive pressures and, all that sort of stuff. So that's pretty much it for today. Again, we're finishing up a bit early. What questions do you have about this? We got a little bit of a break from your discussion forums. The grades are posted. It should say DB3, and then I forget what the words are I put after them. Graded now or something like that. So just you look in there, and what I do is I give you a little bit of feedback on your specific responses, and then a typical response that you can sort of benchmark yours against. Not sure. I'm using the same setup I have used for the past 8 or 9 weeks.